All right, let's get to the Rose Bowl here. You're heading out that way, correct?
Yep.
Yeah, it's one of the all-time greats. I've been to three of them, covered three of them, have loved every single one of them. My parents are going out. Shout out to them. Number 1, Oregon. Number 8, Ohio State. And that's the Wednesday, 5 p.m. Eastern. You'll see the sun set behind the mountains. It is phenomenal. Ohio State actually favored by 2.5 points at this juncture. Over under is 55.5. So this is the rematch of the game that happened back in October. Oregon wins at home by a point. There were so many things that happened in that game. Dillon Gabriel didn't get touched by Ohio State's defense. He's throwing the ball all over the field. Ohio State offensively, pretty good. Run game kind of disappears in the second half. Will Howard trying to make a little something, has that little boneheaded slide play there to end the football game. I think there's so much that happened there, but also so many ways that these teams are different right now. Jordan Burch didn't play the first time. I think that Oregon's defense certainly has come along there. I think their run game has become a little bit more of a feature, and maybe kind of started with that Ohio State game for Oregon. Flip side of that, Ohio State turned a corner on defense. I think they've only given up over 100 yards passing, 3 times after that, 4 times after that, whatever the number is. It's been really good. All of that to say, Nicole, are we getting the national championship matchup a little bit too early?
Yes, 100%. This is where the seeding really sticks out like a sore thumb, right? The fact that Ohio State, listen, first of all, they lost to Michigan, so they dropped, right? That was going to affect their ranking in their season,
right?
But because the seeds 3 and 4 aren't really the 3rd and 4th best teams, Ohio State should be higher. Ohio State should be 6th. They shouldn't have to meet the number 1 team in the country in the bracket this early. So it does feel that way. I'm going to write about that for NBCSports.com about how this feels like it's a heavyweight fight, feels like a national championship game. The winner of this game will be the odds-on favorite to win it all, rightfully so. But it also just feels very unfair for the number 1 overall seed to have this, especially with Ohio State. We've said it all year, right? The talent on the roster, the way that they were built for a national championship run, we didn't see it all come together in the same way that we saw it in the first round against Tennessee. But this is what we've been scared of. This is what everyone else has been afraid of having to play a team that was playing the way that they did against Tennessee. So you're getting, yes, you had a bye. You had 3 weeks off your Oregon. You do have Jordan Burch this go around. So you're going to hopefully be able to get that pressure on,
by the way,
Will Howard.
Jordan Burch is a real life alien, from a physical standpoint. I've not necessarily seen a guy who looks quite like that and can move quite the way he does.
That's what Oregon does, right? Though, the athlete and the speed and the agility and that 8.5 sacks in just 9 games this season. He will be a factor in this matchup. But yes, it does feel like there is a ton at stake, and you're getting the best version of Ohio State that we have seen this season up against the team that's been the best and most consistent team all season long. I've talked about this. The way Oregon's season's gone, there's been ups and downs, but the ability to get up. So, they got that big game against Boise State early when they didn't really quite have their offensive line totally figured out. Then they had the big game against Ohio State in mid-October, right? So you kind of had these peaks and valleys of get up for these games. And then we saw them get up for the Big Ten championship game against Penn State. And listen, Penn State's offense did do some things that we haven't seen them do against Oregon's defense. So you got to be a little bit concerned about that. But if Oregon is able to do the things that Oregon does well, which is protect Dillon Gabriel, give him time, let him cook with his different receivers and tight ends and all these people he has good chemistry with. Jordan James on the ground. He rushed for 115 against Ohio State the first time these two teams played. And only twice this season has somebody rushed for over 100 yards on Ohio State. And it was Michigan and it was Oregon. So there is some things that you could piece together a game plan for Oregon to win it again a second time. You do have an element of the rematch, right? And the familiarity that comes into play here, which I think, Joshua, tell me what it's like to play in the rematch, but you got to give the edge to the team that lost the game, right? Especially in a close game, just the ability to make up for whatever differences you felt. that you had?
Yeah, I mean, the team that loses is typically the team that probably has to like make more adjustments throughout the year. If you're Oregon, why would you change a whole bunch of things? Right?
Right.
Like you played really good football for a large swath of the year after like that very beginning part of the season. You won that game, you won your conference. Like they're probably looking and it's like, we got to tweak this, we have to tweak that. But they already made their changes. They did that when they shuffled their offensive line. They got some guys back healthy. Ohio State, you lose to Oregon. It's like, okay, they changed the defense at that point. Defense played much better. They lose to Michigan. It's like everything goes to hell. And now it's like, all right,
The
now we
entire
have
game
to.
plan changed finally
Yes.
after that.
For offense, it was just like, we're going to do everything that makes us successful. And so I do think there is this interesting, like, Ohio State's probably done more adjusting and they've probably had to change a little bit more than Oregon. So from a game plan standpoint, like, you might see a little bit more of the October Oregon, and you're not going to see a ton of the October Ohio State, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And last thought on this before we get to the other game. What do you make of this retooled offensive line? Because that was one thing that I think we were all concerned about, had questions about Tennessee's defensive front and Ohio State's offensive line that had 2 season-ending injuries. They also had a few weeks to work on it and to get those guys practicing together, and it held up a lot better than I think people expected. What do you make of where the O-line is?
It was interesting. I thought that they did a good job on James Pierce Jr. against Tennessee. They clamped him up. I was actually disappointed watching him, and I went back and watched some other stuff. It's a different conversation for a different type of show. Thought they had a great plan for him. I thought they had a really good plan for the guys on the interior too. I think the difference between the Tennessee interior guys and the Oregon interior guys is like Tennessee's dudes were big as hell, but I don't think they moved very well. Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant moved very well for Michigan. Mm-hmm. And, you know, Derek Harmon on the interior for Oregon is big, but he moves extremely well too. I think that's going to be the challenge now is like, you know, you can hold them up at the line of scrimmage. You might be able to move them a little bit if they're just big dudes and you can get the double teams. But now you have a big guy who also has really agile feet. That's going to be tough for them. That's going to be the challenge for them in this one. I think they can create plans offensively to try to overcome that. But ultimately, it's a different type of athlete on the Oregon defensive line than what they saw against Tennessee.
Yeah, and I know you're really high on Derek Harmon in general.
I love him. I think he's an alien too.
Yeah, they've got a lot of aliens. I'm going to take Oregon here. I think this again is a national championship caliber game that unfortunately we're getting in the quarters. But I picked Oregon in the preseason. I picked them all the way through my postseason bracket. So I think they're going to beat Ohio State for a second time.
Yeah, it's hard because I've flip-flopped on this. You know, I had Ohio State at one point early, winning this game. Flip it back, you get Oregon kind of came around, and that's what I picked in all my brackets. And then I watched the way Ohio State played against Tennessee, and I was like, oh my God. Like, I mean, that team right there wins the title. I think I got to roll with Oregon. It's what I put on wax before the playoffs started. And I would selfishly love to be wrong in this situation.
It's kind of a win-win, right? Either you're right as what you picked, hedging, or you're right as
like
Buckeye.
This is the hedge. It feels pretty good. But to that point though, Dan Lanning, every occasion this year when it was a question about like, well, what kind of coach is Dan Lanning? And at the beginning of the year, hadn't beat his rivals, hadn't won big games. He answered every damn question, right? Won a conference title. He beat all the big teams he needed to beat the rivals. I think he's kind of having that year, you know?